Okay, everyone. So this time around, we are going to be going to New Zealand and South Africa. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All right. So as you can see here, our first stop is, or one of the first places, New Zealand. So the first vines that were done in New Zealand were planted back in it was like 1819. It was by a British guy that went into, that was first to start making wine from a vineyard. After that, pretty much during the remainder of like the 19th century, other Europeans started bringing their winemaking to that country as well. The early decades of the 20th century saw some serious setbacks, which was kind of common everywhere, and that was again due to the phylloxera. So that destroyed all the crops, just like it did in California and France, until that native rootstock was able to help in that matter. And at the same time, it was almost kind of like a double whammy, because much like in America, there was a strong like temperance movement around that time. So it was like no drinking. And then along with that, economic depressions and both of the world wars. But wine kind of seeped into the culture pretty slowly. Um, it was kind of weird that like it could not be sold, like wine could not be sold in restaurants until about 1960. And it couldn't be sold in supermarkets until about 1990. But right around the 1990s, New Zealand started planting like a whole bunch of grapes, and that would be in this kind of like Marlborough region. And that's where they really started to do like a lot of exports, and kind of gaining almost worldwide fame on the strength of that Marlborough region's kind of distinctively pungent and flavorful Sauvignon Blanc. What kind of makes them a little bit different than a lot of other places is because they're pretty new to the whole market. Being that they really didn't start like mass production until the 1990s. It allowed them a little bit more flexibility for like how they make wine. So everything with them is very mechanical and kind of stainless. So there isn't kind of it is very much of that new world. A lot of those old world traditions kind of got thrown out. Like their producers back in 2001 pioneered the screw cap wine seal initiative. So those Stelvin caps that were kind of made popular in Australia, pretty much for them, every single wine is going to have a screw cap. Now, most of the wine that you kind of know from New Zealand comes from this little area right up here. This is Marlborough. So, and this is the South Island. So I'm not sure how many of you know New Zealand, but it's essentially two islands. There's this South Island and there's a Northern Ireland, but it doesn't make nearly as much wine grapes because it's kind of closer to the equator, and it being that much hotter doesn't make for very good grapes. But this Marlborough region, it's cool, dry, and pretty sunny. And because of it having that kind of iconic flavor, 80% of the plantings that are here in this little region are Sauvignon Blanc. But because it's it is pretty cool, those long cool growing seasons really allow the grapes to retain like acidity. Now the second place that we'll be kind of looking at, see, this was actually kind of a newer area, the Central Otago. New Zealand, like as I just kind of went through, kind of the description of New Zealand, for the longest time, New Zealand was a one-trick pony. New Zealand, or that Sauvignon Blanc was it. That was other than like a few weird vineyards out there producing something that no one really trusted. Um, Everything was Sauvignon Blanc, and that was all they were going to be ever known for. But they started a little bit farther, you know, south to them, which would kind of be, in relativity, it'd be more like north to us. So that's going to be even like colder, because considering it's closer to one of their poles. And this central Otago area is both cool, and because of where it is, in relation, it's going to be, it actually has really low humidity. And what's also neat is that because of this mountain range, it's kind of like right here, uh, it actually has some of the highest altitude vineyards that are in New Zealand. And those mountains there really kind of protect the vines from a lot of like really harsh weather conditions. And at the same time, it maximizes, because what they'll be is they'll actually be planted like right here. And because of that, it kind of maximizes that sun exposure, which is perfect for Pinot Noir. Now, we'll flip on over to the other place that we're going to be talking about, which is South Africa. Now, South Africa has a pretty long history of wine production. It actually dates back to like the 17th century, back when the Cape was like a refueling station for trade ships, going to India and on, and beyond that. And then was that settlement for the Dutch East India Company. Now, the first vines that were planted around here were back in like 1655, but it really didn't start to take off until closer to 1700, when the French Huguenots arrived. As they kind of fled everywhere. It's the same. They also fled to California, and that's where a lot of the big reasons why there was a lot of grapes grown out there was because of the French Huguenots. But they also came here to South Africa, bringing those kind of like strong winemaking skills. Now there's a lot of high points and setbacks over the centuries, but when apartheid came to like a definitive end with their democratic elections in '94, those economic boycotts were lifted, and those South African wines started to gain full access to the export markets. Now, one of the big things about South African wines that really makes them kind of stand out, or well, it makes it a really good place to grow, is something called the Cape Doctor. Now, the Cape Doctor is this strong, let me zoom in here, is the south, it's like a wind that kind of blows in from this southeast, and kind of blows pretty much right into that Western Cape in the spring and summer. And what that wind can do, because it's cool, but at the same time pretty dry, is that it helps to suppress any kind of fungal diseases, which is something that really hits a lot of vines. It also helps moderate those temperatures, but at the same time, because it is pretty strong, it can injure the vines and disturb flowering. So I mean, sometimes they'll not get a vintage, just because it's that wind has effectively ruined any of the flowers that were going to produce fruits that year. Now, unlike everywhere else, so South Africa has two varietals that are kind of less common anywhere else. The first one is that they really grow is Shannon Blanc. It's one of two aromatic white wines. The only other place that really, grows Chenin Blanc as a like a definitive, hey, this is what we grow, is Vouvray up in the Loire Valley. But here in South Africa, they actually don't call it Chenin Blanc there. Though maybe Cecilia can correct me, but I think they call it Steen, like Steen. And then the second thing that they grow there is this weird crossing. So someone down there decided to cross Pinot Noir, which is kind of a really hard to grow grape. It requires something, it requires very specific conditions. And then the other one that they tried to cross it with was Cinsault, which is a blending grape that's pretty hardy, but also is kind of stringent. It's more along the lines of like a Zinfandel in terms of like its quality. But those two paired up became what's now known as Pinotage. But what's weird is that for these very light to medium bodied grapes, all of a sudden you get this like highly tannic, almost like medium heavy to heavyweight grape, between them. And so, but other places, like I think there's some vineyards in California, but that's more of just this like oddity that's grown out there. But you really don't find Pinotage outside of South Africa. The place that we'll be going to for both our Chenin Blanc and our Pinotage is here in Stellenbosch. So, so it's a little ways away from the coast, and yeah, so it should be nice and dry, but at the same time, which is perfect growing conditions for wine. With that, I think that's all I really have to say on New Zealand and South Africa. On that note, I'm going to stop sharing and unmute everyone. Whoa. All right. Wow, who is that?
Me, sorry. You stayed muted on that one. You stayed muted on this one.
Okay. Well, now that hopefully everyone's eardrums have recovered. Let's go ahead and get to some wine. I should have said.
A quick question before we taste. You mentioned why they do the screw caps in New Zealand, but my African ones also had screw caps. Is that the same reason why they're using the screw caps?
So, well, I mean, those Stelvin caps have been growing in popularity just because, well, one, there's for the longest time there's been kind of a cork shortage, and at the same time they're a lot more sanitary. They hold better. I mean, just in all regards, I really like screw caps. It's just that for them, it's that everything. Now, like for the South African ones, the Seaward, the Chenin Blanc has the screw cap, but because you didn't get the was it the Neathling or Neathling Schaff? It actually has a cork.
No. How are you saying? Okay, the screw cap, Stelvin?
Stelvin. Stelvin.